If I were to ask you the question, whose child are you? Uh, you know, who would you say? For most of us, we're the child of two specific parents. I'm the child of Victor and Mary Scalisi. You're the child of the parents who begat, to use an old-fashioned Bible word, who begat you. And do you have any family resemblances? Oftentimes you can look at siblings or children and you can see, oh, they look like their father, they look like their mother, they look like a combination of the two. People always like to do that with babies, right? Little kids. Who do they look like? Who do they look like? Well, in the book of Acts, in chapter 17, Paul says in verse 29, and this is part of a section I encourage you if you want to read from verse 16 to verse 34. And Paul is in Athens and he's speaking to the Greek people, to the Athenians who are there. And he says, since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. It's amazing to think of Paul saying these words literally in the shadow of the incredible architecture up at the top of the Acropolis there in Athens, with incredible buildings and temples and statues. And he's telling them, we shouldn't think God is like that at all. It's not, God is not something that can be made by human hands. And he says, we are God's offspring. And we know that like produces like. And so if we are the offspring of God, not just of our biological parents, but if we are the children of God, then we ought to resemble the God we worship, the God whose offspring we are. And that's part of what Paul is talking about in his speech to the Athenians, and how God invites all of us to be a part of God's family, but that requires that we repent and turn from our selfish way of living and turn to living as God's children and God's people, so that we become more like Christ. So as we read elsewhere in the New Testament, that Christ would be the firstborn in a large family. So I encourage you to think about the fact that, first of all, anything made with human hands isn't God and shouldn't be worshipped. God is God alone. And also how, just like our children bear some physical resemblance to us and may even have some traits or tendencies that come from us as parents, in the same way, since we are God's offspring, we also ought to take on the traits and the characteristics of our Creator.